See what happens. Okay.
All right.
All right. So, and we have Tom plus Maggie plus myself and Carl and Mary. One or the other, or both. All right. So, onward. Carl, can you hear me okay? Carl and Mary, you're muted. I wonder if you could just come on briefly. I wanted to introduce you to Tom Multeney.
There we are.
Okay. Have you met
Carl.
Tom? Hi.
Carl and
I'm here too.
Okay, great. Have you either of you met Tom Multeney?
I don't think so.
No.
Okay. Tom,
Unless maybe in the chaos of the possibly in the chaos of post emergency, but
he's the Marshfield member of our committee. And is it properly called Marshfield Resilience? Is that what, or is it Cooperation Vermont?
Yeah, it's we have a Marshfield Resilience Hub, which is kind of embedded in Cooperation Vermont. So they are embedded.
Okay. Do you want to say something about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, my name's Tom Multeney. I live here in Marshfield. I've been here since about 2020. My past experience was primarily working inside of the U.S. Army, where I was a logistics officer and a strategic engagement coordinator, and did all sorts of things in terms of operations and coordinating across civilian agencies, government agencies, and non-government organizations to accomplish all sorts of different things across primarily in Europe. And upon moving here to Vermont, I've kind of thrown a lot of my efforts into resiliency building here in Marshfield. That came to became immediate in terms of the need with the flood in 2023. And then again now in 2024, and recognizing the direct relationship between Plainfield and Marshfield, both in terms of the Winooski, but also in terms of shared population and access to resources and transient communities. And so here to help contribute and try to pave a way forward to prepare for a tenuous future.
Thanks. Carl and Mary, do you want to each introduce yourself, please?
sorry. We're eating is the problem.
We're eating
Carl, you should introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Carl. I'm on the select board. I'm the select board chair. We've been in town for 45 years or so, and certainly feel a close connection to Marshfield and the river. So we're interested in this issue and offer any help that we can on our side. I know Michael's on top of that pretty much. I did have a meeting with Justin and I think it was Chris, new select board member over in Marshfield, and so I know them at this point. If there's any help we can give or any thoughts we can share, that'll be great.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I'm Mary Traris, and I've been here 45 years, as Carl said, and just volunteered in a lot of different roles, and was on site at the emergency center for the many weeks following this forest flood and just saw the impact up close of what was happening there. So I just find it very interesting and want to see what you folks are talking about.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to Maggie.
All right, does anyone have any changes to the agenda? I do not. Michael?
I do not either.
Tom?
No.
All righty. So we're gonna review our meeting minutes from last meeting. And I looked over them and didn't find anything that I thought was incorrect.
Well, I'm glad that Maggie, I'm glad that Mary and Carl are here because they can confirm for me. I think I figured out who the other person was who was at the meeting. It wasn't, her name wasn't Ann. I believe it was Melinda or Melissa View. Is it Melissa View's, is it Melissa View or?
Melinda. If it was Melinda View, I mean, if it was View, it's Melinda View.
Melinda View, okay. That's the primary uncertainty I had in the minutes. And
Oh, she lives next door to the fire station?
yes,
The uphill fire station, yep.
and it was nice that she came to that meeting. And I wrote in Ann for some reason, which
Yeah,
is
no, so I have a completely different list of people, and it was the 24th. So here we are, we're finding problems now. November 24th.
November 24th.
I have Birgit McCall.
She's there.
Okay, Frances Rose.
Oh, Frances Rose was there.
Anne was here in person
Oh,
in
yes.
Vancouver.
Oh, it's Ann Vancouvering was
Yeah.
the Ann. Okay,
And then Scott.
okay. Okay. Tom, do you know Scott Voltega-Corter?
I don't believe so.
They live on Eaton Cemetery Road at the bottom. She is a veterinarian and I'm not sure what he does, but they moved there last year. And I remember them calling me from Tennessee, where they moved from. They moved from Knoxville, and asking how they could contribute, and seemed to be really interested in becoming in some way integrated with the town. But I think they were out of state when the flood happened in July. Yeah, I forgot Anthony.
Interesting. I will make a note to try to make contact with them.
Yeah, the last name is an interesting spelling. It's Scott, Vojtakik, Wojtakik, Corter, and hyphenated Corter, Courter, which is his wife's last name. Amanda is her name, Amanda Corter, Amanda Vojtakik Corter. So,
Got it.
yeah, I think you could probably engage with them in some fashion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do we consider Jonathan as part of the guests?
Yeah, Jonathan
Okay. So
should
would
be
there
noted too. Jonathan was our presenter. And by the way, I should say at this moment that Tom will probably be one of our presenters next month. Tom Multenny. Jonathan
Yep.
Math. Talking about pre-staging of, if I'm not mistaken, talking about pre-staging and thinking ahead to be prepared with resources and equipment in advance of floods, so things aren't in places where they can't be reached and where they are most easily deployed, amongst other things, whatever else you want to say.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, the rest of the minutes, half of that, not even half, about 20 minutes of that meeting was a recap of where we were with the Batchelder Dam. And let's see, Tom, you couldn't tell whether or not this was accurate or not. So Maggie, you said it was okay?
Yeah, the Batchelder stuff is all where we were at the time.
Okay. And the second half of the meeting was an introduction to forest fire safety and forest fire response by Jonathan Matthew. which included, I will say out loud for anyone who didn't hear it that night, that one of the ways to prevent forest fires from spreading to our dwelling is to have a 60-foot barrier buffer around.
It's 30 foot.
30 foot.
Mm-hmm.
I keep wanting it to be bigger. Clear all brush and flammables away 30 feet. There we go, from any buildings near forests. And he continued to point out that most of the multiple brush fires, including out of control brush fires that they had to address, were started by people who were ignoring burn regulations. That there are times when burn regulations are very clearly advising against having any outdoor fires, and people do it anyway. On the minutes, which will be posted tomorrow or the next day, there is a link to daily, well, actually, they're not going on now, but we'll resume in March, daily fire hazard conditions statewide, and then you can visit that and see whether or not a burn permit is advised or not.
There is a typo in your
There is a typo.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
bottom back page. So between Plainfield, Vermont and Amazon, they run together.
Oh, there should be a space. Okay. All right. Any others?
I did find his suggestion to have the best solution for people who own acreage is to have a pond.
Oh,
That was
yes.
really fascinating.
Yeah.
Apparently that was the old way that they used to be able to put out fires quickly, was everybody had a pond that they could just stick the hose in and pump out of the pond.
Yes.
And now that's falling out of favor amongst landowners, not the fire department.
Yeah, and Jonathan said to refer to a map in order to see the ponds, and I couldn't find that map, but I ended up finding a wonderful online, highly detailed topo map of Plainfield, so I gave the link for that in the minutes as well. So if anyone is curious where the ponds are, almost every one of them is on there. I was just checking to see there's a little pond along Fowler Road that I was using as a test, and it's definitely on there.
Yeah, just for point of reference about that, there was a time when landowners got assistance to put in the farm ponds
Really?
for fire prevention. Yes, it was before we came here though, so I believe it was like in this maybe the late 60s, early 70s.
Oh, okay.
But our for instance, our place has a fire pond. It's more of a nature habitat now, but it's still has water.
Do you have any idea what state department was behind that?
I don't, Michael. I don't know if it was the Department of, I would only be speculating. I really don't know.
Okay.
But I had heard from like the Prescotts and some other folks that there was a time when these ponds were encouraged and aid was given to put them in.
Yeah, well, if anything has changed is that there are more forests now, and
Yes.
the necessity would be even greater. Carl, are you going to that meeting on the 8th with the?
Yes, I plan to.
Well, there will be people at that meeting we could ask the question to.
Yeah, yep.
Maybe I can remember to do it, or you could.
Well, between two of us, maybe we could figure it out.
Yeah.
I will say that Jonathan did say that if people wanted advice, that they could call the fire department and the fire department could help give them advice on putting a pond in. But I'm not sure if there's any access to resources in terms of helping raise funds or grants. But our fire department is very willing to help people if they're interested in placing one on their property.
And I should ask, in terms of the prior segment of the minutes, if Carl and Mary would be, if I should summarize in a couple of minutes what the latest state on the Batchelder Dam project is, would you be interested in having me recap that?
Sure.
Yeah, yep.
We have a study underway, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Maggie, but we have a study underway that has already been funded that is studying the upstream and downstream impact of the dam. And also hypothetically, although I don't know who's qualified to do it, telling us if the dam itself has safety issues or is deteriorating in any way. Roy Schiff is the primary agent to do the study for SLR. Yeah, you know Roy, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So SLR Engineering have the contract. I don't know if they have a dam engineer or a contracted consultant who knows dams, who can actually do an analysis of the dam structure. But the state, we've been informed by Michelle Braun that the state requires us, that is the town of Plainfield, who own the dam, requires us to either repair the dam so it meets 2024 standards for safety, or tear it down or modify it. And they have said that if the dam proves to be unsafe, which they say they think it is, that we would, the least expensive option is to tear it down. So the study is, first of all, to find out what's actually true. And secondly, whether having the dam there reduces or increases flood risks to residents. That study, we will get a final report on in April.
And we're really interested in the erosion impacts of reducing the water through the village, because there's a lot of structures that would be compromised potentially. So that's another one of the things we've asked them specifically to look into.
Yeah, that's the South Bank, the one that is like the backyard for Positive Pi and Vancouvering and such. Whether or not if the water was lowered in the upstream containment, would those backyards collapse outward into the stream and be undermined, or whether they are underlaid with bedrock and would therefore be resistant to erosion. So we hope to get those answers by April.
So my part of the update for that is that the engineering firm have asked repeatedly for us to make the initial contact with the certain homeowners along, particularly around the Main Street Bridge. So we're doing what we can for them that way. We're coming up to some some of the properties they want to look in the basements of specifically are rather difficult, but also like they're not giving us a firm way of them making an appointment with the homeowners. So it's kind of becoming a little bit of a problem. But luckily we have a little bit more time.
Yeah, they say they want to be able to get into the basements of all the homes they're interested in, which includes some of the, sorry?
I was just saying, wow.
Yeah, that includes some of the houses that are slated for buyout on the north bank. So the Quinton property, etc. Yeah.
So I'm personally working on trying to find contact information for some of the homeowners. Like for instance, the River House, which, you know, only anybody has as contact is a property management company who we don't know yet if they have the right to be able to allow like a river engineer access to the basement. So we still have a couple question marks out to supply the engineering firm with contact information for everybody on their list, but hopefully they'll get into the basements soon. And then so Michelle Braun was going to do a small update for us today, but she had to cancel. And so she will be back closer to our deadline, which we're hoping to have this study. This is what we're referring to as the feasibility study. The feasibility study portion of this completed and wrapped up by April.
Yes, and we also had moved, I don't think it was this meeting, no, the prior meeting, we moved and approved to invite see, what is his first name? Last name Everhart. Brian Everhart, who is potentially offering funding to the town of Plainfield to pay for the cost of a scoping study. So that if we know out of the three possibilities, that is leave the dam up, tear the dam down, or modify the dam at a different height, once that study determines what's advised and the townspeople respond to that, in other words, it needs to be brought in front of the town in some fashion, may it just be the select board, but definitely the select board at the very least, then the agency that Brian Eberhardt represents, which is in A&R, part of A&R, has offered to direct funds to us to pay for the scoping study, which would be the actual engineering study to determine, like, if the dam had to be torn down, how it would be torn down and who would do the contract and what it would look like afterward. If it was going to be fix the dam, then who would do that? That scoping study would determine what engineering firm, what contractor, what potential costs would lie in front of us, and then we would be asking for hazard mitigation money, presumably from the state, to pay for the actual work. So we kind of are, the pathway is open for us to go from start to finish with this project now. And so with hopefully the town not bearing any costs until we reach the point where the actual remedy is done. How's that sound, Carl and Mary?
That sounds great. That's important information, but as you know, we are limited what we can spend right now.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I will add that there was a law that passed in the state in July that will actually start charging municipalities for damaged or dams that are decreed in any way, shape, or form not up to the standards of the state. So if we did nothing, we could potentially have a recurring cost by doing nothing if the dam is considered damaged or in disrepair.
Yes, we basically would be considered a non-responsive dam owner who was resisting repairing a dam that was a danger. I also should add, and I haven't got the figure right in my head, but there also will be an annual assessment to the dam owners, including the town of Plainfield. I think it's $2,000 that would be assessed. There's something like 1,800 dams in the state, and each of those dam owners would be assessed the same fee, which would help pay for the cost of dam engineers doing the inspections once they take over in July next year. Yeah, ANR is hiring 2 new dam engineers on top of Ben Green, who I met with on Monday. Ben is the only engineer right now.
So we started this about a year ago. So we actually felt like it was kind of fate, like being like, you know, in July the legislature passed, you know, we're preempting that sort of legislature. So hopefully we can save the town also recurring costs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is this strictly safety? As part of the study, does anybody look at the wildlife aspects of it?
That's also is being addressed. And as a matter of fact, the biggest push to remove the dam is coming from Michelle Braun, of Friends of the Winooski, who's very involved with us with this. And Michelle's perspective, and I did the research on this, if our dam is removed as an obstacle for aquatic life, if the dam isn't there and direct transition up the water can be done by fish and by insects and all kinds of other life, it opens up 1,100 kilometers of additional main stem and tributary streams to the Winooski upstream of us. In other words, if that dam is removed as a primary obstacle to fish that want to go upstream or any other aquatic life, it reconnects a natural watershed area that's really quite large, and that's very much in favor of moving the dam. Is that the way you've been thinking about it, Mary?
I was just thinking about from the, I know that people in town are curious about both, right? I mean, obviously I think the safety is the overriding factor, but there are a lot of people in town who are very interested in the, in the wildlife aspect of it. So, yeah.
If I remember correctly, in our initial meeting with Michelle Braun, when she presented that she would be able to help us find funding to do the feasibility study, she had said, I believe the Nature Conservancy had already flagged the Batchelder Dam as being one of their higher priorities for aquatic life form. Like,
Does the Conservation Commission address this? Do you know, Mary?
We haven't, specifically, it's been talked about a little bit, but, I don't think Michelle has ever. I think until the study's done, there's not much role for the Conservation Commission. So,
Okay.
if any, but it's good to note, and I am making a note of it,
We can
that
definitely,
this is happening. So that's really interesting, Maggie.
yeah, we can let you guys know when the study's in, and obviously we'll be publicly announcing that when Michelle
Yep.
comes to talk us through it, but
Yep.
maybe
Yep.
have a joint conservation hazard mitigation meeting.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. And we've certainly talked about Michelle about other issues, watershed issues, but not specifically that. So,
Is Sean
that
still,
would be interesting.
is Sean still with them? Mary, Sean White?
It's not a name I'm familiar with, but we could probably find out online.
Okay, yeah, I mean, the reason I asked the question is because Sean, I was on the Conservation Commission in 2015 and 2016, and Sean was the primary contact person rather than Michelle. And Sean was the one who helped plan the water garden on Mill Street.
Hmm.
So she was very involved with that in a hands-on way. We had annual work days where we would repair that water garden, and Sean was always there.
Yeah, we've had a lot of talk about that water garden. We've had it's uh it's believed that it's probably past its time, and
Yeah.
not nearly large enough
Oh.
in any event. So that's interesting that there's a name now attached to it. But I hadn't heard that name come up, but we have talked to Michelle about it.
Okay, well, there you have it. I mean, I ran into her recently at some event, and, oh, I know, it was when we were, Carl, it was when we were at the UVM for the,
Yes. Yeah, I remember that name.
yeah.
Yep.
And she wasn't with Friends of the Winooski anymore, but she definitely was still involved with conservation and natural environment work.
Right.
So anyway, I guess that's it for
Alrighty.
for evaluating the minutes from last week, last month. I mean, next on the agenda.
All right, budget review.
Right. You take over the.
Carl get a rehash of this one in January.
So,
I shared my screen this is our proposed budget for 2025-26. And the only thing that is different from our last year's budget is I did add some additional funding for some old home day supplies. We had emergency management pamphlets that Michael had bought during previous years of the hazard mitigation, and we're running very low on those. So whatever sort of preparedness materials that we'll get will probably be from emergency management through the state. So they're quite affordable. And we give those out at any event that we do. But otherwise, the main bulk of our costs are that we planned for last year to have a public forum about emergency preparedness for people with disabilities or different abilities. And we have speakers, stipends, and then mileage. And we were basing our mileage at the federal rate based off of people potentially coming from the Red Cross in Concord, New Hampshire. So if we don't use it, we don't have to use it, which is great. And then other than that, it's pretty straightforward. We do use a lot of maps and technical diagrams, particularly when we start having public forums for the Batchelder Dam, when we get to the design point, especially being able to print those out, high definition maps, potentially, and or the signage for the actual public forums. So that's where most of our funding goes to.
Tom, did you or do you, looking at this, think of anything that we might be overlooking? I know this is the first time you've probably seen it, but
Yeah, it is. No, I mean, I think you would probably have a good grasp on the return of an allotted 150 days in terms of the public education materials and outreach. I know Maggie, you were saying that like a lot of it can come from the state emergency departments and that those can be relatively cheap. Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a very good and worthwhile utilization of funds in terms of, developing products that can sit in people's junk drawers until a time of need, and then it lays out, hey,
yeah.
here's where you go, here's what to think about, make sure you turn off your propane before you drive away, those sorts of things. That's kind of my only consideration is like in terms of providing as many tools as possible to as many people as possible for unforeseen circumstances. That's a worthwhile use of money, and I don't know how far $150 goes, but something to that's the only thing that really jumps out to me. And also I mean, I think there is a certain overlap between public education materials and printing, because they're, so you may be looking at more 300 to accomplish similar goals.
Well, speaking to that, Tom, and I'm glad I guess Carl's still here.
Yep.
Do you think 100, you're more likely to see the need for printing technical maps? I know George Springsteen did a lot of printing for us out of his own pocket right after the July flood. And a lot of the things that are on display here in Town Hall were printed out of George's budget. But if we had to do it ourselves, I mean, these big, 2-foot by 4-foot printed materials, like the maps of downtown after it was flooded, do you think $150 is actually enough money for technical diagrams and large map type printing costs, or should it be higher?
I don't think that's enough, but I don't know what to tell you
Okay.
and what you should have, because it depends on how many you are going to need. I know the larger format is more expensive, even with the digital file that they can use. But I don't know what to tell you. I would ask if that once you get a budget together, that it should go to Josh before next Monday if you can do it.
Yeah.
We're trying to wrap up our budget.
Yeah. Actually, it's not this Monday. It's Monday, the 6th of January, right?
Oh, right. I'm sorry. Yeah, the 6th of January. Sorry.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
Christmas Eve or something.
That's correct. Yeah, Josh and I are also meeting about the emergency management budget in advance of the 6th.
Okay, yeah, just if he has those numbers, that's all we really need.
I'm tempted to double that printing and move that up to 300. I'd hate to run out and say we need these big maps for such and such a reason. We can't afford to print them. And I should also add that in terms of the speakers for the May forum, it's going to be April, May, or June. Somewhere in the mid to late spring, we have the forum every year. Our main speaker is actually the disability specialist in the Department of Public Safety, who is attached to the Emergency Operations Center. So she is an emergency management person representing the needs of people with disabilities, and very eager to talk about how people with disabilities need to plan much better for their own evacuation, for their own survival if the electricity goes out. She's in a wheelchair herself, but she also is very, very savvy about this stuff. And we're delighted to be able to have her be our speaker. Okay.
Which actually may end up saving us some money, right? Because I think she was not going to charge us.
Well, the two people the other person would be the Red Cross trainer out of Concord, New Hampshire, who is responsible for, and I've already taken a training from her in February of this year, where she has a special section where she spends about 15 minutes in, I took a course in shelter administration, and she spends about 15 minutes or more talking about the individual types of people with special needs who could arrive at a shelter. So that's the other half of the equation, getting people out of their homes, and then what kind of needs would they have once they get to a shelter. So we're going to try and do both.
Yeah, we had this planned for last year, and then we decided to postpone it because we were having not we, but the town hall here was having the updates done that Michael was organizing for bringing it up to ADA compatibility. And we felt like it would be.
It'd be better to have an ADA parking
Wait
space out
until,
front.
yes, we had an ADA parking space.
Yeah.
We had a public forum on disabilities.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. And then then of course the flood happened. So it didn't happen in the fall either. So we're looking ahead to this spring. So this is our big public forum for this spring. So last year we only spent, was it $40 of our budget?
Are you talking about this year we're still in?
Yeah, the year we're still in, yeah.
Yeah, but like emergency management, some of the biggest spending still lies ahead.
Yeah.
And so I think we have no trouble justifying the budget that we're putting forward, I don't think. And we'll have a chance to talk with the select board about it.
Alrighty.
Okay, after that, the main topic.
Do we need to, we don't need to approve this or make a motion, right?
Actually, we do need to make a motion to increase the budget by $150 for training and to approve the budget as modified.
So with the printing costs here being doubled to $300, so.
I make the motion that it be approved as modified.
Alrighty, I second.
Second that motion.
Oh, Tom.
Tom seconds.
All right. Tom seconds.
All those in favor? Aye.
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 And
Yes.
also, we did not do a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
All right. Well, I will move to approve the motions as amended.
Okay. I second. No, I can't second. I wrote them.
Tom second.
Sure, I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 So that's minutes as amended, which I will then submit to Bob Fancher for publishing. Okay. All right. So the next is what hovers over our heads as a 2025 year, because we're going to be in a new year in a week. What can we imagine will be our biggest challenges in that coming year if we are prognosticating? And what, if anything, can we do to make use of the experience we've had so far to prepare better for what might happen? So that's where we start. And I should add that I'm going to minimize my display here for a moment, my own display. I don't think it's going to affect the, no, not happening.
Escape.
Oh, it does do it to everybody. All right. Sorry about that briefly. I want to go into a folder that I have here, which I don't know if I can see. It's PDF, so, all right. First Street is what I wanted to go to, and I wanted to look for the one that says specifically flooding. Stream. First Street is a data aggregator and analyst company which sells data analysis, both looking backward and forward, to the federal government, to towns and municipalities and states, and to individuals and businesses if they wish to pay the fee. It's pretty expensive. However, I just because I was looking for a map, I got bumped into a series of First Street data pages for Plainfield, Vermont. And this included because I'm not going to do a screen share. This is just basically, well, I might have to do a screen share for you to see it. But they have a data on, excuse me, that shouldn't be in here. They have data on climate risk, flood mapping. They have data on extreme risk, extreme heat possibilities, hurricane map and climate storm events, and then air quality as from, say, Canadian wildfires, and a wildfire risk map. So each of the areas that they examined are based on historical data, which they've taken from the town of Plainfield. And they actually gave the date of the last major forest fire in Plainfield, which I didn't know, but they did. And similarly, in terms of flood risk, they've actually included already the 2024 flood in their database. So they know areas that were flooded and what are likely to be flooded. And so it's not the most pessimistic risk that they put in front of us for awareness is flood risk. It's still the top of the list, which shouldn't surprise anybody. Would it be helpful to share a screen of what they said, or should we just talk about it?
You can also drop them into the chat and everyone could have them and look at them if you wanted to share it.
As PDFs?
Mhm.
Just drag them into the chat.
Yeah, so open the chat,
Okay, can you do that?
double click on it. There you go. And now just drag it down here into the
Okay, I'll
message
drag
box.
I drag this into the
That's the
chat.
hurricane one. Is that the one you
Oops,
wanted?
no, it isn't.
The second one.
Let's see, that's poor air quality.
There you
There we go. Here's their flood mapping, which, by the way, if in Tom,
You have to put it in the box. down
oh,
here.
I'm sorry.
No worries.
I'm not technically the most savage here. Type the message there. Oh, okay,
Okay, and now send it.
excellent. Okay,
Little.
and then I send it.
Ta-da.
1.46 megabytes. So this is a set of, this is basically a web page, and at the bottom of it, you will see the actual link to open this up on your own internet. If you do that, you can also, Tom, go to Marshfield. In other words, they have a page for Marshfield as well, with all this information, flood damage, forest fire, et cetera. Let me see whether the other one was extreme heat. And I'm going to drag that one in because we don't talk about that very much, but it's something that we are prepared for here. One of the things that might be fresh in memory is that this building had no air conditioning until actually July 5th of this year. And it was amazing how different it was to work in this building, because we had sometimes as many 40 people on this floor who were working together, as Mary will remember, to deal with flood volunteers, to distribute materials right after the flood happened, to coordinate large numbers of supplies and gear that had to go out. It was so different that this room was air conditioned.
Yes,
And
lifesaver.
yeah, it was. I think it would have been absolutely intolerable in here if it hadn't been. And since we are now moving closer to having our shelter in use upstairs, we probably will start a discussion about air conditioning the whole town hall. In other words, the upstairs as well. But what we know is that in hot days, that is where it's hotter than 90 degrees, of which there were 4 last year, 4 days that were hotter than 90 degrees. People who cannot handle it can come here for relief, and it will be a cooling shelter or a cooling center. And when I bring the shelter, I should also add that we have 10 new people who have been trained by the Red Cross in the last 2 weeks to be shelter volunteers. And so they're amongst that group and I just relocated the list from 2017, where Rob Bridges and I had arranged for the training of another group for the earlier shelter. And that list had 20 names on it. So I'm hoping that in this group of approximately 30 people, we will find volunteers who will be able to provide help when people come to the cooling center. In other words, if we have to open the cooling center, there will be people here to greet them, to find out if they have any medical needs or medical emergencies and that sort of thing. So we're trying to ramp up the sheltering and cooling side of things. And although it's not quite as unusual, we'll also, if we have sub-zero days and we lose electricity, which is another thing that I'm sure both of you, everybody remembers happening up here. We had a 3-day sub-zero day and night event in 2018, and the electricity went out in the middle of that. And that is a real danger for people who have no backup heat in their homes. So although this isn't, again, we're not in our major risks, these kinds of secondary risks that are happening every year now are part of our perspective of what we should try to prepare for. So I think by the end of April this coming year, our shelter will be equipped every way needed to be an emergency cooling center, warming center, and shelter, evacuation shelter, which is the first time we've had such a thing since, well, for quite a while, for at least 5 years. So that's part of the preparation. About flooding, does anybody have any ideas how we could prepare better for floods?
I think, Michael, to me, the only thing would be the thinking back on the folks who used so much of the resources, right? So it's like there were a few people who took inordinate amounts of effort to help them out.
Yes.
And I don't know if they could have been better prepared. So I guess it goes to the sort of the education aspect of things. To really encourage people to have a plan for themselves and then also be able to plug into the emergency management. Because I'm sure you know who I'm talking about.
I am still working.
You know.
I'm still working with 2 families. I'm still working with 2 families, from flood displaced, and I'm still trying to find better housing for. That's true. I should add that I forgot to mention, but Josh and I have worked this out. I'm going to stop having my personal phone be the emergency management phone. So starting in a week or 2, there will be a dedicated mobile phone and a dedicated computer for emergency management rather than my using my own. And that will mean that the numbers that are published in terms of being able to contact me will actually can distribute them more widely because I won't be giving out my personal phone. You know, I mean, it will be an emergency management phone, and it will sort of speak to what you said, Mary.
Yeah.
Public education is another piece that I am thinking ahead to April or so, maybe even March. I was playing with the idea of having a town-wide forum, not a forum, but a town-wide, like a town meeting. I mean, basically, you know, even though that means something else when we have it politically for elections, but a town-wide gathering, let's say, where people talk about their flood experiences and what did not work for them and what did work for them and how they were caught unprepared or how they were prepared. And everyone together devise strategies. And in other words, the public education, and also be something that would be put out on Zoom, but this would be maybe something emergency management would sponsor and have in March a townwide basically a strategy and memory session where we would talk about what we all went through, but also work together as neighbors and friends to see how we could be ready to accept people who needed to get out of their house fast, or help people devise evacuation routes that otherwise they might not be prepared to take if they hadn't thought about it. You know, so the way you're suggesting, Mary.
Mhm. Yeah, it's true. I mean, a lot of people who've even been here a long time don't necessarily know how the back roads connect.
Yeah, and some of them don't anymore.
Yeah, right. But I mean, there is quite a bit, and how the fire department comes into play, and
Mhm.
the rescue group, and
Yeah, Jonathan could present
Mhm.
too. He could be there. Jonathan, Gary, anybody else would be. Dave Perot could be there to help people do that strategizing.
I wonder if like Efficiency Vermont would also have an interest in being there to answer people's questions about things they could do to mitigate flood damage to their property. Like, do they, or who would know like what properties would be best for putting in like a French drain or something, you know what I mean? Ways of keeping water from entering into people's homes.
Well, the other thing that Efficiency Vermont hasn't said, but FEMA has said, and I don't know if anybody's aware of this, but since I was involved so much with individual assistance, I did hear it. When a furnace is wrecked or badly damaged by flood waters entering a basement, FEMA attaches a condition when you replace the furnace or the hot water heater or whatever it was, that it be elevated. In other words, that the furnace no longer be down at the base of the basement floor, but be raised 3 feet off the floor with some kind of a platform. And that's something people, I mean, there are still people who haven't solved their heating for this winter because, I mean, well, actually, I just think of a couple that just got their heating system hooked up on Saturday last week. And I know my own furnace has to be replaced, and I'm still waiting for FEMA to interact with my contractor so that that work can be done before winter. And so,
Which is
I think
Saturday.
wait a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's limping along, but it's making strange noises and acting like it'd fail any minute. So what I could guess is that it would be, and tell me if this is wrong, but I think that if you would just announce stuff, people may or may not either hear it or respond to it. But if everybody gets together and say, well, what about this? And basically talking neighbor to neighbor and supporting each other's ideas. And it seems to me that that would be actually very creative.
Mhm.
And let me go back to full screen, by the way.
It's also community building for those who are inclined.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've sort of been a concern for me for Plainfield that I feel like maybe could enter the discussion somehow, particularly looking forward, is there is a very serious thing where homeowners insurance are starting to just completely decline coverage in certain areas, what they call kind of like hotspots, that aren't even in correlation to the rest of the state around them. And I have concerns that potentially people trying to buy homes in Plainfield going forward, or, you know, Plainfield could potentially be considered one of those hotspots. So homeowners insurance could start being really hard to get in Plainfield because the percentage of the homes that were damaged in the 2024 flood. And it is usually particularly harder for people with new mortgages, you know what I mean? Because certain places will be like, oh, we're not going to provide home insurance going forward in those sort of localities. I don't have any indication that Plainfield is necessarily flagged as one of those places. I just think that the trend across the United States is that whole swaths like North Carolina, it's becoming, in Florida, are becoming really hard to receive homeowners insurance on new mortgages. So homeowners are having a harder time buying houses because of course you can't get a mortgage without homeowners insurance.
We haven't talked about that at all publicly.
Yeah.
I know my insurer, I'm the only house on Hudson that didn't have significant flood damage. I had minor flood damage, but not significant flood damage. And my insurer has already threatened to decline to insure me after April. And it's, yeah, I don't know what to do about that yet. I hadn't thought about insurance as a related issue, but it certainly is a related issue.
Yeah.
It's sort of one of those things that hits the pocketbook, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a climate crisis,
Yeah.
like 4-liter. It's going to hit our pocketbooks in that way, potentially as a community before the actual damage, other damages sort of start rolling in. It's definitely like there's a small town in New Mexico that has never seen a wildfire, but it's been flagged as uninsurable because it's considered a high risk wildfire location. Based off of mapping data and stuff like that. So it's not, there is an actual evidence of it happening in really like small little specific municipalities across the country. And I believe that State Farm is pulling out of California almost entirely and no longer providing homeowners insurance within the entire state of California. There was some data that came out in the New York Times recently that was like, in 2015, it was like 8 states had places where homeowners insurance was no longer being provided. And this year alone, or I think the data was actually 2023, it was like 19 states. So we're seeing the trend of homeowners insurance becoming harder and harder to get going forward.
Wow.
Another piece that I think we could address today in terms of looking ahead to being on top of something ahead of time is that although we constantly bring back the number of 27 houses that are going to be bought out or has to be bought out on top of the 3 that were already approved for buyout just recently, so 30 homes altogether, not everybody in that group wants to leave the house they're in. And reaching a buyout appraisal, once you get to that point, which when your house is approved for buyout, that's the first thing that happens, you get appraisal. So right now, 2 sets of property owners on the north side of the Winooski are just getting appraised. And they will see dollar values based on their value, the value of their house the day before the flood in 2023. The one that came where the Winooski went over Route 2. And they will decide then, is it worth it to me to leave or do I stay? In other words, if they offer me $240,000 for my house and property, can I buy a house that I can live in somewhere nearby and have a decent home? And the answer may be no. So some of the families that are balanced on the edge of do I get bought out or not are still staying in their homes. So all the families on the north side of the Winooski are still in their homes. Right now in the village, I can count on Hudson Avenue 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 households that are staying on Hudson Avenue in buildings that are up for buyout. Across the brook, along Brook Road in the village, there are 4 families who have been offered a buyout, and 3 of them are still in the houses that are offered for buyout. And on Mill Street, 1 house is completely abandoned and will never be lived in again, but also 2 households who are offered buyout are still living in their house, although 1 is away temporarily for medical reasons. So the reason I bring this up is that if these families, even when offered buyout, decide to stay, we have to consider the potential damage that will occur in that neighborhood again if we have a flood like we did last year. Because the brook is different now. It has changed its upstream configuration greatly, having widened out in many places. But the one place that it even widened right in the village past Susan Grimaldi's house, it is huge. It's like 55 feet across instead of 15 feet across from one side of the brook to the other. So that definitely reduces the amount of energy that the brook carries when it comes to that part of the brook. But then it narrows again very sharply at the bottom of that wide plain when it just enters the channel just upstream of the Mill Street Bridge. So I brought this up to the funding group on Tuesday after having reviewed how the brook behaved last week, Wednesday, when we had that flooding, that near flooding event where the rain and the melt together on Wednesday brought the level up. It almost jumped the banks with only 1.8 inches of rain. It was that close. It was up against Peter Young's greenhouse. It completely filled his yard, completely filled the backyard of Art Edelstein's house. It was still rising when the rain stopped. So if the rain had continued, it would have continued to rise. It would have been over the retaining wall on the south bank. So what I proposed tentatively at that meeting as a strategy for improving things next year is that we get a study or enlarge a study that's already underway to determine whether that stretch of the brook, which is about the equivalent of 1.5 city blocks, almost 2 city blocks, whether it's possible to get in there and actually remove the retaining wall and widen the brook 15 feet at least, so that it has more room to breathe there, so it isn't so likely to jump the banks. Because if those families are still living there, they'll be going through the whole freak out all over again. And I would prefer they not. It's thinking about Owen and Jane Bradley or Peter and Lauren. These are people who are really exhausted by flooding, or Susan Grimaldi, exhausted by flooding. So Susan is actually not likely to flood because of that broadening of the floodplain. That's really the most reassuring thing, is that her house is probably not going to be threatened in the future. But the people downstream of her on the way toward the Mill Street Bridge are likely to get more damage. And I wouldn't want to see that happen if we could prevent it. I don't know if we can do it in time. I don't know. How would I present that, Carl? I'll ask you because you're here.
I don't know. It does come down to a personal decision, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The trouble is that if they make a personal decision that's not very wise, it can cost the community money, it can cost the community anguish, and it can cost the federal government money. So it's at some point, we would hope that they would really consider all the costs associated with taking the risk to stay somewhere where they shouldn't. So I don't know how you reach people like that. I know we've talked to some people directly. You have, and Arian has, and others who are choosing to stay, who might not really be wise to stay. It's very hard for people to leave a home.
Yeah, well, I love to be preemptive if we can be. That's the part that FEMA doesn't address very well. Even when they talk about building back better, in other words, looking ahead to the future and not repeating the same mistakes, usually you have to demonstrate damage first and then say, here's what happened. In this case, that section of the brook upstream of the Mill Street Bridge hasn't actually been pointed out as a culprit of any kind. But now that I've observed its behavior, I'm seeing more and more that it is actually a very weak point that is likely to fail. And whether you can go to FEMA, Gary Smith is going to be working on this a little bit. I'm going to be writing some language for him. But the idea is that we try to draw a link between the damage and the, for instance, Jenny and Jim's house buyout. Try to link these areas that are clearly unworkable. Marshall Stover's house has been abandoned also at the bottom of Hudson, and use these houses as an example of what happened last year, and then talk preventively as a hazard mitigation related thing tied to a historic event, and see if we can actually make that work as rationale. I don't know.
What about, yeah, what about the state, that river corridors program that they talked about? I don't really know much about it, other than they were supposed to, it's supposed to kind of pick up where FEMA leaves off in certain respects towards mitigation.
We might hear about that on the meeting on the 6th, because all the people in those related programs are going, I'm not the 6th, on the 8th of January, that we just got the invitation for about today, that Keith Cubbin told Karen about. And I looked at the list of people who were invited to that meeting, and it looked like there were people there who would represent that program you're talking about, Mary.
Yeah, so I mean, that might be a good forum for you to try to condense those ideas down and talk about that very issue, you know, like when yeah, what do you do about a weak spot?
Yeah,
When,
Marshfield
yeah.
has the same kind of
Yeah.
issues, just, different for them, but similar issues.
You mean where along Gilman Street? Where it narrows in the center of the village after it goes under Route 2?
Yeah, I mean, anytime we seem to try to control the river, we pay the price. So being alert to that, being aware of that's probably wise.
They did remove a dam. Tom, do you know anything about that? They removed a dam in that stretch of the river as one preventive thing. Do you know anything about that, or did that happen before you got there?
I think that happened before I arrived. I'm not super familiar. I know they did replace the primary the first to flood kind of culvert on Gilman Street that then effectively much faster than any impact on the bridge itself makes that road impassable. And so they replaced that in the fall of 23. And then with, it was certainly a different flooding event in July of 24 in Marshfield because, Plainfield was impacted so much more by the Great Brook.
Yeah.
But in terms of the mitigation efforts that were made in Marshfield, they seem to help significantly in areas that were washing out previously. But it was really pretty basic culvert work and improving known kind of water flood paths and moving waterways. But I don't know about the dam removal and what the impact upon that stretch of the Winooski and Gilman was like pre and post.
I know basically the idea, giving the stream as much room as it possibly can have. One of the things I've always been curious about, and I think maybe the Historical Society could help me here, is that the granite blocks, they're 3 by 3 foot cubes, a wall made out of 3 by 3 foot cubes on the south side of the Great Brook, just upstream of the Mill Street Bridge here. Those blocks have been in place since the railroad put them there. The railroad was responsible for rebuilding that whole stretch of the brook back in 1840s. And all that structural stuff, the retaining walls along the Great Brook, along the edge of Hudson Avenue, under the what had been a bridge abutment going over the brook itself, all of them had been there in place since 1840, and this July flood ripped out stuff that had been there for 150 years without seemingly blinking. I mean, it just, you look down and these 3 foot by 3 foot cubes were gone. And I don't know how many tons that represents, but nobody's been able to find most of them. And they're downstream someplace, maybe in the Winooski. And that tells me that this was a very unusual flood for one thing. But the part that didn't get ripped out is where the brook is in a sort of like a chute. It's like sort of narrowed down to a very straight pathway and just upstream of the Mill Street Bridge. And that now seems to be too narrow. It doesn't seem to have enough capacity. So what I was thinking we'd have to propose, and I told Gary I'd try to get something to him, Gary Smith, our PA guy, before the end of the week, or maybe before the beginning of next week, is a proposal that we would actually remove that whole retaining wall that's been there since 1840, remove it, dig a whole much wider channel, and then put the retaining wall back as the new, what will be the sidewall to a park, because Jim and Jenny's house is definitely going to go away, and that would be part of an area that would become public land. So to do it sometime soon, before we lose more houses, basically. Because it looked to me that it was very close to flooding with such a small amount of rain last Wednesday. We get a real flood event, I'm pretty sure it's going to endanger Peter and Lauren's house. Marshall's house may be undermined. Jim and Jenny's house will be impacted directly. And so it's kind of frightening, because you have to almost be prescient, you know, have to know what all this changes upstream of the brook in terms of changing its energy and its distribution of water in different places, how that all ends up impacting the village. We don't have a study yet to tell us, for instance, if it's less flashy or more flashy as a result of that. In other words, if you remove all the impediments to downward flow, does that mean when water hits the watershed up there and we have a heavy, like an 8-inch rainstorm, is it coming more quickly to the village, or is it being slowed down by all that width? And if it's coming to the center of the village more quickly, that actually means we're in more danger next year. And we don't have, we haven't asked the expertise to look at that, although Du Bois and King, Josh Pitts, contracted with Du Bois and King to study the possible ways to solve the rebuilding of the Brook Road. And they are contracted to also hire a river engineer to talk about the impact of the changes on the brook itself. It might be possible to ask them to carry that analysis all the way down to the center of the village.
Or to the Winooski.
Or to the Winooski, yeah. I mean, we could lose our rec field for all we know.
Yeah. I know it's a concern we've often talked about. When you walk up, like along that sort of driveway that has been built up for the rec field to drive into the rec field,
Yeah.
and it's a good 15-foot sheer drop now at this point.
Yeah.
Like was never not dangerous, but now it's extremely dangerous because there isn't even the trees to like help keep people back.
Yeah. Well, these are all preliminary discussions, of course, a bigger or preliminary touching on topics that are much bigger. But the other inundation that could.
But we know what's happening. Yeah.
What's that?
No, I was just asking Carl something.
Sidebar.
Well, what happens if the dam is overtopped in Marshfield? And just a preliminary analysis has been done now for 5 years without having a major study devoted to it. We know that Old Schoolhouse Common, I just had the discussion today about, for instance, whether Old Schoolhouse Common should be an evacuation destination for kids at Twinfield School if they have to be sent home in the middle of the day because flooding is threatened. And the answer was absolutely not, although that is the only alternative right now in Marshfield is the Old Schoolhouse Common. That's where Twinfield is supposed to go. And so I'm trying to, next week, negotiate a contract with Goddard, so that is where they'll go, because then they can cross Route 2 and go up Eaton Cemetery Road and get to the Goddard campus without ever being in the watershed. They can get out of the flood zone very quickly.
Taylor Hill.
Yeah, we're not sure. But having them out of harm's way doesn't mean their parents can get to them. If there's a major flooding event, they may be at, let's say, the Goddard Hay Barn for 2 days before their parents can get to them if the water doesn't drop at Route 2 and if Hollister Hill Road loses some culverts. And when you're thinking hazard mitigation, unfortunately, you have to be practical about the kind of things that could possibly descend simultaneously in the big rainfall event. If it involves a dam release, Old Schoolhouse Common will disappear as a functional building. It will be hit by a wall of water traveling 80 miles an hour. You know, it's just not going to survive that. Nobody should be anywhere near that building when that happens. And nobody should be in the center of Marshfield when that happens, including the fire department. So we have some big challenges to solve. And as far as the dam is concerned, I'm not going to talk about it anymore, except to say that I was invited, actually with Arian Thabumari, into a new legislative committee that was created last month called Dam Safety. So I'm now in a statewide committee for dam safety. And Arian's in that because Arian is a dam owner. Arian and Kim own 2 dams. I had no idea. But they are, Arian is the head of the Vermont Dam Owners Association. So who would have thought? So
Busy guy.
yeah. So we're now, and Great Mountain Power has a representative in that committee, and Morrisville Power and Light has a representative in that committee, and Town of Rutland has a representative downstream of the Chittenden Dam, which Green Mountain Power owns. They have their fire chief is on that committee. So that's another area that I hope we're going to start solving very quickly with that committee. It's the whole point of that committee is to establish standards right now for what an emergency action plan really should do so that the towns can prepare for dam emergencies. And ultimately, it will set the standards by which dams need to be evaluated, especially if they have a population downstream like Marshfield. Which is, I mean, that's why Molly's Falls Dam is one of the most dangerous dams in the state, along with the Chittenden Dam and the Harriman Dam in the southern part of the state with Reedsboro downstream. So we just know there's a lot of work to do, and this is a beginning discussion. We're probably running out of time.
Yeah. We have 4 minutes.
4 minutes, yeah. Does anybody else want to contribute something here? I mean, we're touching on a lot of stuff.
Yeah. I just have a question about Twinfield, because Twinfield itself is never going to flood.
Well, I looked at the new inundation maps for the dam release, and it actually comes up to the bottom of their driveway. In other words, you can't get to Naismith Brook Road.
Okay.
And all of the Onion River Campground would be underwater. That's no surprise. But if they don't get across Route 2 to Eden Cemetery Road, they can't get out because also a high rainfall event will cause the bridges upstream from them to blow out the way they did in 2023. In other words, the bridge on Liebrook out of Laird Pond, up on Laird Pond Road, that culvert blew out, and then Holt Road bridge blew out also over Naismith Brook and became undrive. So you couldn't go uphill to get out of the school. Yeah.
I know this is something you've already been talking about with them as emergency management director, but doesn't it make more sense to shelter in place and get them a generator?
That's what I was going to say. They'd have food and everything. Yeah.
And the facilities are already prepared for the amount of children that are there versus moving them with a potential risk, you know what I mean, of...
Well, I'm grinding my teeth as you speak. I started meeting with Mark Mooney, who then was principal, about getting a generator because the school has no power. And often when there's a high rainfall event or a high rainfall and wind event, it also means regional power goes out. So you got a flooding at the Winooski in conjunction with lack of power, which did happen in 2011, for instance. And what you end up facing at Twinfield is that I found out that even their emergency radio system by which they would call the bus drivers to come in the middle of the day, come in early and get the kids, it won't work if there's no power, because the backup battery supply on that radio system was non-functional. And I checked again a year later and it still hadn't been fixed, and Mark Mooney was still principal. And now that Mark is no longer the principal, I tried working with Rachel Hartman, the new principal, to create a emergency plan that would address some of these issues and get a generator, because she said the school wouldn't even have water if there was no generator. It would have no security system because the locks wouldn't work. It would have no way to use the kitchen. It would have no heat. It would have no lights. And it would have no emergency radio system if the power went out. And I said, well, we've been talking about getting a generator with Mark Tucker, the superintendent, since 2016, and he still hasn't allocated money for that. So how can you force a school to install a generator when they don't want to do it? It's really bizarre.
Huh.
But if the same people, I mean, are they going to be the ones responsible for helping transfer the students to Goddard?
Yeah.
So, I mean, do you think that they'd be as equally helpful in that way?
My last meeting at the school, I thought was going to be with Rachel Hartman, ended up with being Mark Mooney, who now is no longer the principal, but was installed by Mark Tucker to be the school safety officer for all the schools in the school district. So the guy who did nothing for 5 years is now in charge of all the schools. And he did not have any clear idea about how a generator would get funded. And I pointed out that Homeland Security had a program back in April that I actually applied for here. That was the first place I applied for money for a generator at Town Hall. And I said, did you apply for that? And it said clearly that school districts were eligible. He said, no, I didn't know about that. I mean, sort of like, I don't know how to turn that situation into anything but a tragedy. It's really very shocking to me and actually kind of upsetting.
Have you actually?
Sorry, Mary, what?
Yeah, have you actually gone before the school board rather than the administrators?
Jana Osmond and I, when she was representing, is she still representing Plainfield? Jana?
Jana, yeah.
Okay, so Jana Osmond last year and I had a talk about exactly this and about the fact that the school didn't have an emergency action plan, even though I'd been asking for it for 4 years, and trying to meet with them and trying to meet with the school safety committee, and then having Mark Tucker, the superintendent, said that the school safety committee can't meet with me unless Mark Tucker is there. I mean, it's sort of like there's some kind of weird thing going on. But the part that interested me is that when I talked with Jana about coming before the school board, she invited me to do that, Mary, to talk to the school board, which would mean basically going around the superintendent. She told the chair of the school board that she had invited me to come before the school board. He turned around and talked to Mark Tucker, and Mark Tucker said, no, he can't come. I can't talk to the school board. And the school board chair agreed with Mark Tucker, and the invitation was withdrawn. I don't know what to do with it.
Can't you show up?
I suppose I could be surprised. Yes.
Yeah, I really, I don't know, to me, it just feels more logical to shelter in place. And I recognize you need power, but if it's a matter of getting a generator as opposed to moving, 300 or 400 kids in school buses through waterlogged streets, it seems to me it would be a lot safer for the kids. And I have to think that the parents would be more comfortable knowing at least their children are safe.
I agreed, Carl, but without a generator, they can't flush the toilets in the place. And if it's winter,
Oh, I hear you. I know that they have to have a generator. So that has to be, maybe the town of Plainfield and Marshfield both can pressure the school boards to consider getting a generator. Because they're very able to.
How would we become
a party in that. I guess that's the way that I would put it. How would we?
We're trying to keep the children of the community safe, is my view of it. And if there's obstructions because people don't understand the gravity of what they're dealing with or could deal with, then somehow we have to get the word into them. That's my
Yeah, I
sense.
think some sort of petition, some sort of, awareness campaign of, people not recognizing one having the recent, trauma and scar tissue of, back-to-back floods, but then also the recognition that like those can occur when they're, truly separated from their children and dependent upon, a community resource in the form of Twinfield, to care for their children through kind of whatever happens, but to then bring about the awareness of such a like gap in capability or how quickly, that ability to provide safety and care for those children can be lost, and that the solution is as simple as, raising funds one way or another. There's a great many ways, but raising funds to have a generator installed and to push that at the school board level, at the like PTA level, at the front porch forum level, at the, at the church, the post church level of being like, what, how much can it cost? And then like, what does it take to get there? Because it is significant, and it's the sort of thing that like, I don't know. I have no children, and like, and I would be 100% behind personally contributing through taxes or like personal expense to try to further that capability at Twinfield. So I don't know.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to, it absolutely needs to be a Plainfield and Marshfield push together. Don't, not you alone, Michael.
mhm.
And that you might even want to let somebody else be a point person, for that effort from your mitigation committee, from Marshfield's group. But to outline the scenario. And it seems to me that between the Vermont Community Foundation and various grants, that it's just hard to believe that it's not something that somebody could come up with. And then maybe have the community do the matching funds or something. I don't know.
Well,
But that sounds more serious than I'd given any thought to.
well, the other side of it is because the discussion about it is more than 5 years old now. The Marshfield Energy Committee has Plainfield representatives on it. I am occasionally at those meetings, and Bob Atchison is often at those meetings. And one of the things that I brought this up repeatedly in the Energy Committee because it's actually an Energy Committee issue. And the two things that I posed was if they were going to do a solar array at the school, which was one of the things that they were trying to figure out, could they do, whether or not I could persuade Green Mountain Power, which actually looked like I could, to make Twinfield School a pilot project for sort of like a massive power wall installation where they would have backup power that would be actually sustainable. They might have a generator, but also in addition, they would have a solar array that would be constantly keeping a battery bank charged that could run the school for 2 days or something. So that already has been explored a bit. I haven't had, the last Energy Committee I went to, could anybody figure out how big a generator would be needed to run everything at the school. How many kilowatts does it have to be in order to keep the school safe? Because in the winter, if there's a power outage and the temperature drops to 25 degrees inside the building and there's no running water, no toilet flushing, no heat, no lights, that's not necessarily saying the kids are safe. They might not actually be safe there. And that's why I was pressing hard for an alternate evacuation destination, because if we know it's going to flood and we can get them out of there to Goddard, they'll be much safer at Goddard than they would be in a school without heat.
So
Well-
when you say Goddard, do you mean the hay barn at Goddard?
One of the buildings, we would have to.
Do they have generators there at Goddard?
Yes,
Okay.
And could they hold 300 kids?
yes. That plan was originally worked out by Rob Bridges with the school back in 2014. And every class in Twinfield had a destination office in the Goddard campus. And therefore the third graders under Mrs. Whatever would be meeting at such and such an office on the second floor of the hay barn, and they would wait there for their parents. It was worked out once, but when the Goddard contract expired and the town didn't renew under Sasha Thayer, then we ended up without that ability to use Goddard. And now that we have a new group of people there, I was going to go up next week and actually negotiate. Well, actually, I talked to the facilities director today at Goddard, and we said we would talk about this at the first week of January. But
Yeah. I met with Michael Davidson today, not about this, but I think he'd be really receptive to it. I just still worry about the idea of transporting kids and, you know, in storm situation. If I were a parent and I've had both my kids go through the whole school there,
yeah,
I trust the teachers, honestly, with the care of my children than unknown folks, let's say.
Well, he's saying the teachers would go too.
The teachers would go to. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
It
Goddard,
sounds like it's all worked out.
Yeah.
But this is why the education's important, Michael. It's, you know, people don't know anything about this.
I understand, and the school is trying to design an emergency action plan now. I looked at it; it's very far from being completed, and I haven't been invited to participate actively with its creation, so I'm holding back a bit because I don't want to be seen as a, I don't know, disruptor. But the other side I could say is that when the Winooski is coming up, Carl, in other words, when that's the flooding you'd worry most about is the Winooski cutting off the bridge at the bottom of the Mason.
Right,
Brook.
right.
You get plenty of warning that that's going to happen. So if at 8 o'clock in the morning rain starts to pour down, you know that by 2 o'clock in the afternoon that bridge is going to be impassable. You get kids out before noon, and you make sure that you get them to a safe destination, which is not the old schoolhouse common. You get them to a safe destination before noon, and that's where getting the school bus drivers there and taking the teachers and the staff and the students all, so the school is empty when that evacuation is over. That's what I want.
So the idea is particularly for kids whose parents can't come and get them, but they would just transport the classes as a class, and then the parents who could get them from Goddard could come and get them safely from Goddard at any point after that?
Yes,
Is that the idea?
yes. And the parents were given a copy of this map so they would know where to find their child.
It certainly makes sense to me as a backup, but I would still think that one of the main priorities would be making Twinfield safe for 2 days.
That's right. You
Under
still
any
need a-
conditions,
you
but
still need a generator.
does Marshfield have an emergency management director?
Absolutely. Carl has spoken with him, right? Justin?
Justin Campbell. He's also the chair of the select board. And I might just talk with him and see what his thoughts are on this.
I was just thinking, would that be a pathway to potentially put more pressure on the school?
Justin was at
I
that.
think
Justin
the
was at,
school should have a generator, whether it's the emergency shelter or not, in my mind. Because,
you're so
you know,
right.
even if it's a couple hours, it should have some backup power.
Yeah, and that meeting with Mark Mooney and myself was also attended by Justin Campbell. And Justin's perspective, and I want to be sure I say this accurately, Justin's perspective as a member also of the Marshfield Fire Department is, is that the dam is safe and not likely to fail. In other words, that I'm making too big a deal about preparing for a dam emergency, and that the lesser issues are the Winooski flooding, and that the schoolhouse common is probably adequate. I mean, that's sort of what I get. I
Okay,
think that's a fair representation. Now, his mind can be changed, but
Yeah.
I would say that the combination of two changes, one is to have a better destination to go to, and the second is to have a generator or a solar array that can produce stored power. Real bad.
Didn't this last flood cut off Schoolhouse Common?
Yes,
Mhm.
Yeah.
The last two.
the last two did.
Yeah, so,
Very vulnerable location.
yeah, so I guess I don't understand how that's a good destination, then even ignore the dam situation, just talk about flooding, but
Yeah.
but if it continues to cut that off, and you've got all those, and you've already, say you've moved the kids in,
Mhm.
I guess you wouldn't move, yeah, see, this is where it gets tricky, right?
more than half the kids or parents are gonna be 7-10 miles away from them. That's
Yeah.
gonna be really uncomfortable.
Yeah,
That's another part of it. The twin field was created to be in the center of two towns,
yeah,
so that,
Well, and if they're at Goddard, then Marshfield's further away, but
that's what I'm saying.
yeah,
Marshfield parents, did I say Plainfield?
No, no.
Marshfield parents are gonna be farther away
Yeah.
from their kids than they would
Yeah.
be at the school.
yeah.
Well,
I don't know, it's up to it.
Yeah.
Same with Old School Common, though. All
And the other-
Plainfield parents would be further away from
Right.
it.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, so it bears, it's a good topic for you folks to keep bubbling up, and let the community know something about it, you know?
well, I would say that of the two possible destinations, that is Goddard or Old Schoolhouse Common, if Old Schoolhouse Common were to continue to be the destination, it's very likely you couldn't get to it. In other words, if your child would be stuck in a building that would be surrounded by water. If they were Goddard, you can come by Hollister Hill Road from Marshfield
Right.
to select your child. However, everybody realistically knows that the bottom of Hollister Hill, to attach to it, either go up Beaver Meadow Road or you go up Creamery Street in Marshfield. And both of those, where they meet Route 2, are both going to be flooded. In other words, you can't get to Hollister Hill after a certain point of Winooski flooding. So there's almost inevitable that some Marshfield parents will be separated from their children until the water goes down,
Regardless of where.
regardless of where the shelter is, the kids' evacuation point is. It's a big planning thing, and I think our fire departments and our school board and our parents should be part of that planning. I think it's a real big deal, and I worry about it a lot, actually. So let's just keep bringing it up, you're right.
Yeah. Wow.
All right, well, I think my head's full.
What fun you have.
It's always like heavy topics.
Yeah, yeah.
I think I'll go ahead and adjourn us.
Okay, Maggie, are you moving it?
I am moving that we adjourn.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye,
Aye.
all right.
Okay, 8:46.
Good work, people.
All right, well, we'll keep at it. All right,
Bye.
so our next meeting is, I believe, the 16th of January.
Sounds right. Let me look. Correct, 16th of January.
Okay.
All right.
Great. Thanks, guys. I gotta run.
And we'll look forward to hearing your first thoughts about this business of pre-staging and resource management.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
All right, bye.
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 Oh, I'm so glad that Carl and Mary were there.